I have lost it. I haven't seen it in about a year. But when I last saw it, it said November 2008.
Yeah, mine said 2015.
Oh, gee.
We're talking about name tags.
Oh, yeah.
Needing some updates.
And
Tom just won the award for being the only one.
It's went on. Nice. Well, first my apologies for last week because I got confused about what time worship starts.
You haven't been here that long.
I haven't been, I mean, I've been here for a year. You'd think I'd get it.
Yeah.
But it passed on back for cake, you don't mind. My last congregation was 8 and 10:30, so 8:30 and 11, it's just too close, I don't know. But I looked up at the clock and panicked, and so anyway. You know, when you do those sorts of things, I often allow myself to rest in the idea, like, I clearly needed 20 minutes.
Yeah, there you go.
Get myself combobulated or something.
I thought you were pretty bold to agree to do this between services.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Erase this for me and I'll write up the next piece.
I remember that kid.
Yeah.
I'll erase the board, Pete.
And you were the one who made fun of that kid, I'll bet you, Tom.
No, not me. It was the guy sitting next to him.
Okay. Yeah.
Never you.
You know him, Don. You've been around since two.
I couldn't get in trouble because my dad was the dean of boys.
Okay.
Lucy and I listened to a Beverly Cleary book the other day, an early Beverly Cleary book, copyright 1963. And so they're talking about like going outside and pounding the erasers, and I could just see Lucy in the back, like she's no idea what it is. She doesn't know what a blackboard is. She never will.
Be careful what you say about 1963.
I know.
Had already graduated high school by then.
That actually was a pretty good year.
The next one was a little questionable.
That's right.
Few questionable decisions. Well, good morning, everyone. I had, last week I said, oh, we have one more week and then there's going to be adult forum, and Don very kindly reminded me what week it was and everything. So anyway, I do have a whole other week planned on race. That was the last one.
Okay.
So, race, I think is 2012 was when that one was passed. I don't quote me on that, but we've taken them all in order, so it's interesting to kind of see how the statements develop. But that'll be our last one, is on race and racism. So it's not the most recent, but I think it'll be a great conversation. In fact, I'll kind of put this as an aside, but the council is reading a book called, I think it's called We Shall All Be Changed. But it was written kind of early in the pandemic about like what's the church going to do and be as a result of this. And I was interested how the editor put the pandemic, or respiratory illness, up against George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, and how we have these twin pandemics in our society. I thought it was such a great way of kind of talking about that. So I think it'll be a great conversation. Of course, so here's like, everything I say next week, I'll say now. The ELCA is the whitest denomination in the United States. So we have a lot of work to do there. So, but clearly related to race, which the statement does not deny, is health and healthcare. So this statement is from 2003. I think that's right. Third to last biennial. For a while they met twice a year. Now the church-wide assembly meets every 3 years. So in 2006, I think it was the first triennial. So the church is kind of responding to the changing environment. And I do feel like this is a point in time where the social statements take a bit of a turn from these like very direct, like, you know, the abortion and the death penalty, into kind of trying to shape theology. And as I was reading this, I I said to Matt, I'm so interested that as I watched my pastor friends talk about the pandemic, everybody quotes Luther. Luther has a letter that he wrote about whether to flee from a deadly plague. The question about like should the clergy and nobility stay in their town if the plague arrives? And he says, yeah, we face this together. And everybody quotes that, and nobody quotes the statement that we have about health and healthcare, which states pretty clearly that health is a public good and that we should all be working together for the health of our neighbors. So I don't know, I felt like there was like some low-hanging fruit in here that we could have been working with. But okay. So let's start with, the basic question. What is health? What is health for?
Health is the absence of illness.
The absence of illness.
Good health, actually, because you can have bad health.
That's, yeah.
I guess health then could be good or bad, so then it's not the absence of good health. The absence of
Good health.
It's
Yeah.
health
It's
is,
wellness.
yeah, health is a description of our being.
And in my mind, it includes physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Physical.
That's no fair, I was just thinking the same thing. So I guess.
Yeah, Tom Square.
Yeah. So we might say it's holistic.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna say. Holistic.
It's getting recorded.
It is. It is. I think it's being live streamed.
I mean, in a way, health is also a measurement because we have different, to have health, to be able to do certain things, we kind of measure how well we are, like health at 75, health at 95, health at 25 are different things.
Kind of dovetailing. Maybe we might say it's relative, right? Like, which is, I mean, to some extent, says that there's not really this one. We like to talk about health as if there's this like clear ideal of what health is, but we realize that maybe that's.
I think about, the first thing that is measured in terms of health is an APGAR score for a child when the baby is born. And remembering so many times, because one of the first things I did was work with newborns that were born in families that had socioeconomic difficulties. And knowing that, there were characteristically low APGAR scores, and thinking every time those babes would go home, this child has so much less possibility of living a holistically well life than many. So I would say, it's accessibility to services and trying to think of another term that would put that all together, but it's
Contextual.
yes.
Like the amount of good health you can achieve is affected by so many different. Yeah, absolutely. If you think about this theologically, what would we say uniquely as Christians about health? Maybe a starting point. We would say that health is a gift.
Yes,
Good health.
it's a gift.
Good health.
Good
Because you can have bad health.
That's
Yeah.
right. You're right. That's a really great point. And I feel like there's even a further complication that exists in the idea about like, in the idea of disability, right? And the idea that like a person who's disabled can still have good health, even though, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of complicated. Does that make sense? So maybe I'm gonna park that here, like the idea of like bad health and disability. And like that, like there's something about that that's really important to the whole conversation, right? That like that I actually think that faith attempts to speak directly to, right? The idea that like one of the things that we would say very clearly is that health is finite, right? We will all die, and with us our health goes too, right?
Right.
But it's also a job, I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but it's our responsibility to put effort into it.
Yeah, the faithful word is vocation, right? Right. We have a responsibility. We use this for sexuality, but I think it actually fits with a lot of things. It's a gift and trust, right? Like, it's a gift we have, but we do have a responsibility to preserve it, to manage it, to steward it. Any other ideas? Okay.
You have some more? You said?
I have several more, so I'll see. Let me add another one and see if you all. It's neighborly. We have a responsibility for our neighbors' health, right? It's a public good. It's actually, I think, pretty important that good health is a public good. And maybe over here might also go, it's a commodity. Like, a sense like not only that you can have bad health, that you can have disability, but also that the way our society treats health is as a commodity that is bought and sold on a marketplace. How interesting that maybe one of our most notable improvements has been to actually call it the marketplace, that you can buy your health care on the marketplace.
Yeah.
And if it's a commodity, which of course it is, health is also a function of government, good government, good policy. Yeah, would be the better word.
Yeah, and if you could probably go anywhere, but I'm going to put it here because I do think that that's what we would say as Christians. Like that kind of, remember that like two kingdoms thing? Where God is the God of both. That we would say that God is the God of government, and so therefore it's a function of good government to provide for that. Look at how much the word good is coming up here too, right? Enables full participation in the common life. So you can't participate in society without good health, really. My sister, this ends up being a big issue, and so I'll like kind of disclose this, but my younger sister was born with an autoimmune disorder that she was supposed to outgrow and never did. And it turns out that what was an autoimmune disorder we thought she was born with was merely a symptom of a larger autoimmune disorder. And so now she has this whole spectrum of like issues, including diabetes, type 1 diabetic. So she's insulin dependent, has been for about 3 or 4 years, and it is autoimmune. Her body has killed off her pancreas. It's super cute. And so we have a lot of conversations about this because, like all diabetics, she's able to get her insulin, but she hoards it. She never knows what's going to happen. Her insurance company changed her insulin, you know. So all these sorts of things, and this is one of the things that she talks about is like, if I don't have good health care, I can't participate in society.
Yeah.
So, Carolyn's not here to judge my spelling. Social responsibility. The church system is a matter of justice.
Mhm.
This, I think, among other things, talks a little bit about how good health is, by and large, as you said, by and large available to people who can pay for it.
Mhm.
Right. But that everybody has a right to be healthy.
In America, right? In America.
Say again.
The health care in America is available for those who can pay for it. In other
That's
countries,
right.
it's not.
That's right. That's right.
And I have a corollary to that. It's also available to those who are healthy enough to get it, because the way our government works, where you can't refill a prescription that maybe your maintenance prescription to, like, if it's a narcotic or whatnot, to the last day.
Yep.
If you're too unwell to go get it
Yep.
on that day, then you
Mhm.
have no access to health.
Yeah.
Where does access go on this list?
Yeah.
With the myriad problems of government, I think.
Yeah, it's that and the enabling of participation in community life.
I feel like good health assumes access, and that's
Yeah.
a major
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the full statement, early in the statement, talks about the issues of cost, the issues of access, and the issues of rationing,
Yeah.
which all speak to justice and equity and government and public good, you know, they just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it piles on for sure. Did I get them all? Oh, we have one last piece, which is that it's not the final aim. One of the things that the church really adds to the conversation ends up being a lengthy piece about quality over quantity, right? So just because it's available doesn't mean that it's the right course of treatment. Just because a life can be preserved doesn't mean that that's the right choice. While we can use our advocacy to create more equitable and efficient access, another piece that the church contributes is a conversation about what does it mean to be a healthful community? What does it mean to have good health? Which may not be curative, it may not be wrong, but it can be quality, it can be God-given.
So does the church believe that it can be not chosen and denied as in self-euthanization?
Oh, you're gonna go right to the
I
hard-hitting question.
didn't see that in the full statement, and I was disappointed, because this is a long one. And I thought it was going there, because it starts out talking about, cultural attitudes can lead to increasing reliance on expensive curative medicine without significantly extending lifespan or improving quality of life. And I thought, oh, at some point, they're gonna talk about this. And they didn't.
I think that there's a social message on euthanasia. So I think that answer, and remember, like I said, that this is a point in time where the church is beginning to talk about the issues more writ large. So like when there's a, the statement on human sexuality is a really great example. The question in society at the time was about gay marriage, and the church expands it into a question on sexuality. What does that mean? And so this is kind of that piece. And so then the church is writing the major theology and then entrusting its hierarchy to speak directly to that problem. So I think that a statement on euthanasia exists. Whether or not that's the right thing to do is a good question. To answer your question, I think that being good Lutherans, we would say it's super complicated. I'd have to go back and look to see exactly what the statement says, what the message is. But this one talks about hospice and palliative care. I think the church really, really struggles with euthanasia because, for a number of reasons. One is you can't talk about euthanasia and ignore like the Tuskegee Institute and forced sterilization of the mentally disabled and people of color. So that sort of, that's kind of in the ether when you talk about euthanasia, because who determines the value of a life? And so I think that that ends up being where the church houses its complication, right? Not in the idea of is suicide right or wrong, but in the idea of what is being stated there is that a pain-free life or a life free from suffering is somehow more valuable than a life that includes suffering, and it's really hard for the church to go there. Does that make sense?
Yes, but obviously, it is the church trying to make the decision of the individual who's doing the suffering in order to not make a decision at all for those that don't have the choice.
I think you're exactly right. And one place where we won't go, where we refuse to go, that you see more as actual goal in evangelical traditions, is I don't think it's actually my responsibility to prevent you from sinning, right? In fact, I believe that you are a sinner, and we're all sinners, and we're all going to screw this up. And so there's no cardinal or venial sins in the Lutheran Church. All sin is sin. Does that make sense? And so even while we think that the faithful thing is to raise these questions and then to walk beside people as they struggle with them. So just like abortion, we don't take it off the table because, you know, what is good is not necessarily what should be legislated. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I know.
So, I mean, I've never been in that position as a pastor. I've never been in that position technically as a pastor, but I've worked hospice. And we all, if you've worked hospice, you know that you don't generally withhold pain medication from people who are asking for it. And so I think I'm being fair to say there's a very broad gray line in hospice care about what sometimes occurs. Does that make sense?
Just anytime someone signs a DNR, though, I mean, that's their choice to say, I want to die, but I just wondered what the...
Oh, yeah, and we're like, that's cool. That's super cool. It's not...
I think all the churches are okay with the DNR. Really? I don't
think Catholic churches.
I've used some caution in
I mean, I don't mean to be overgeneralized, but the debates I've seen, I guess, haven't broke down over that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're probably right. There are some traditions, I think, that look a bit skeptically at hospice care, though I wonder, that's like all things where there's a nice spectrum there. You know, we have like Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists coming into play there, and they have a kind of different relationship with the medical community. So I would imagine there's something on the other side as well. But I mean, I think you're right that by and large, the concern isn't along the DNR. The concern is about physician-assisted suicide.
Right.
And I mean, I just think as Lutherans, we just end up in this like this is the thing we have to, I mean, hey, this is what I preached about today. This is what we have to wrestle with. Like, the nature of faith isn't that there's this cut and dry answer, but that, like, we should never cease from accompanying one another, regardless of where that journey. And so I think we'd be hard-pressed to condemn it. Go ahead.
I have a personal example. I was a guardian for a woman who was schizophrenic from the age of 14. Was put in a mental hospital when we had those in Indiana, which of course gave her drugs, which ended up frying her kidneys. So then she was on dialysis. And she made the decision finally that she wanted to quit doing dialysis.
Yes, I mean, that's
And so I think that's a perfect example. And I mean, we talked about it. Some of the people that she associated with felt like she wasn't capable of making that decision. But she had very clear moments in her life. And she spent the whole month of May in the hospital, and they would sedate her. She would go kicking and screaming to dialysis because she did not want to do this. So I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but my vision is they sedated her, sent her off, brought her back, and then the next treatment, a couple of days later, they got to sedate her again. I guess it was better than strapping her to the bed, but
sedation is just medical restraints.
it's just, but I mean, and I finally said, I give you permission to do this because she's living in hell basically. And be prepared for another one. I mean, if you have a kidney, if you've received a kidney and you stop taking your anti-rejection drugs, essentially you're saying you want to end your life. So those are hard choices, but they're choices that people make. So
yeah, I had a person in the same boat, and what we ended up agreeing on together, because he wanted us to give permission. So, the right word, that thing that so many terminally ill people want, and being on dialysis and stage renal disease is a terminal disease. And what we agreed was the next problem was it. Right, the next thing that cropped up, then he would stop dialysis and we would let everything kind of take its course. But I mean, it is worth pointing out that, I don't know, people lingered for a long time with infection and illness before we had all these medical interventions, but medical interventions certainly complicate the question,
Yeah. One of the things that the hospice movement is trying to encourage is change in terminology from do not resuscitate to allow a natural death. And I think that is so much more powerful because what we're saying is that we want to remove all means of artificial life-sustaining interventions to allow a natural death, whether that be a pacemaker or any other type of medical information. And that is why advance directives are so critical.
which it does have in the statement.
Yeah.
Waiting for that, yeah.
So very critical because so many of us will live long enough that we'll be dependent on some type of medical intervention on an ongoing basis. And it does lay responsibility on us to share with those that we empower to care for us, to say, this is when there is no longer the quality of life that I desire, and want to stop all medical intervention that would preclude me from having a natural death. And I just think it's so vitally important, and I say that both as a retired healthcare provider and hospice director, that is the hardest position for families to be in when communication is no longer at its prime, and people struggle with wanting to know what to do.
And it's also so complicated. I mean, we all think DNR, I wouldn't want to be, shocked back. I wouldn't want to, not CPR for so long. Maybe not intubated, but there's so many things that it's helpful to think through in advance.
Yeah. Do you want antibiotic therapy? Do you want to have medications to stimulate your heart? Do you want to have oxygen? Do you want to? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And again, that's why it's so very, very necessary.
And part of that idea about it being contextual, like you said, what decisions we might make in our 30s or 40s or 50s are different than we make as we age.
Absolutely.
And so they change over time, for sure. The other piece, though, that this whole conversation is pointing to, that the church is obliged theologically to push back against, is the idea that a life is free from, any life could be free of suffering, or that good health is free of suffering. I think I'm so grateful you added that idea, because like bad health isn't necessarily suffering either, right? It's all contextual. My first job out of high school was as a nurse's aide at a hospital. Super glamorous job, if you can. And at the time, we were getting ready for an accreditation survey. And so everybody had to be well versed in certain things like pain scales. And this is actually around the same time this was written. And you know, like the pain scale was always like, assess your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And what I really appreciate that's changed since I worked at a hospital is that sense of, and where is your pain normally? Or where would you like your pain to be? The idea that like suffering and good health are not mutually exclusive. The church can't ignore the fact that suffering, that Jesus suffered, and so that there is something about the suffering in our life that connects us to the cross, to God. And not that we wish suffering on others, but that it's just a necessary part of human existence. So, definitely a place where we share a lot with Buddhism and their sense of like, what it is to suffer. And anyway, okay, so let's talk about Bloomington, shall we? And what's our healthcare situation here? So let's talk first of all about what we have, and then we'll talk about what access is like and what we don't have. So what do we have?
We have a hospital.
2 hospitals, right? All right. We also have some level of traumatic care. We don't have the highest, but we have some trauma care.
Including pediatric, neonatal.
Some walk-in clinics,
Walk-in clinics,
lots of these before.
Which you now have to
walk
make
into
appointments.
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a free clinic, don't we?
Yes.
Yes, we do. We have a compromised system in terms of numbers of physicians available to treat the numbers
you're
of folks
skipping
that we
ahead,
have.
Jan. After, what we have
I'm
first.
sorry.
What we have first.
We have doctors.
We do have doctors.
Bite my tongue.
We have comprehensive health education at our fingertips, right? We
Yes.
have IU right here, okay?
Yes, we have a regional training
Thank you, that's it.
complex.
And as hard as it can be, let that resident come in and do it all again. It's supposed to be good for our health, right? What else? We have a mental health hospital, Bloomington Meadows, right?
All right.
Yeah,
What's it called? Bloomington Meadows.
well, Bloomington Meadows and psychiatric services.
WIC, Women, Infant, Children.
That's right.
We have hospice.
Several.
Yes.
There's a Planned Parenthood in town.
Yep.
A few others similar.
We have an Alzheimer's education
Yes.
support group.
But we're all going to take part in it. Mental health counselors and therapists. Rehabilitation facilities. Multiple.
Needle exchange programs. Up for the, what's the van do that goes out and gives away free meals, what do you call that?
Oh, yeah, unequal exchange.
We have Meals on Wheels.
Area 10.
Mm-hmm.
We have nursing homes?
Area 10 is the
Extended
agency on
care
aging, in case
facility.
you don't know.
Right.
We have pharmacies and pharmacists.
We also have intermediate care facilities.
Assisted living communities?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Group homes,
Adult daycare,
No, we don't have adult daycare anymore.
sure we don't.
We don't?
mm-mm,
None exist?
No.
don't have one.
Adult daycare.
COVID.
I thought it was Joanna.
No, she had a traumatic head injury.
We had to close it.
Yeah, Stone Belt.
Yes.
Mhm. So that down here? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We have Centerstone.
And centers. Yeah.
Wow.
We have Medicaid and Medicare.
And HIP.
Yes, and have.
Healthy Indiana plan for under or
We have vaccine clinics.
Mm.
Oh, can we just also say we have a banging health department? I mean, I just went to Ohio this weekend and nobody's wearing that. Like,
Yes, yes.
You just have to cross any county line.
that's
Yes.
true.
Yes.
We went to Indianapolis, yeah.
Right. One of two in the state of Indiana have a health department.
You're kidding. So we have a safer environment that is as
I mean, we have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
We have a lot of resources. We also have, first steps,
Yeah. First steps.
developmental clinics.
And we have, some health assessments in the schools, so, vision, health clinic, or flu shot clinics, and, COVID in the school.
Dentist, comes to the school. Oh, dentist.
We have home health
We
care.
have multiple home health care, is what I was mentioning.
And dental care. Dental.
And doctors should have a slash nurses. What nurses
Yes.
is there?
Nurses,
Social workers.
therapists, therapists, social workers, and,
Mental health counselors, food trainers.
we got that,
All right.
there's a nice name for a custodian who works in a hospital, but I can't think of it. Those people are,
Yes.
we had one when Lucy was in the NICU, and she'd go, "How are you, Mamacita?" And I just, every morning, I just wanted to, like, I'm so glad. She was the one who was, like, pumping us up, like,
Yes.
she never had bad news for us, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So tell me what's bad. Or maybe I'll just write over it. What's not working? What about, let me rephrase the question. What is it like to access?
If you don't have good insurance and if you don't have the money, you don't have that white power privilege. It is underfunded, understaffed, and they don't have the capacity anymore to care because they have too much on their plate.
Yeah.
And I would add that even if you do have money, it's nearly impossible to navigate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have education, some of that stuff is so complicated.
And 4 to 6 months to wait to get in for your first appointment.
Right, yeah.
If not more.
Yeah.
If not more.
The more serious the issue, the longer you have to wait for it.
For HIP, you have to be uninsured for 3 months before you can apply.
Yep.
I know, which means that people,
Yeah.
which means that people won't do it.
No.
It's too risky.
Mhm.
And there's not all healthcare providers are equal.
Nice way of putting it.
And there's a con job going on. That sounds like a conspiracy theory that with this Medicare Advantage. And what it does is put you at a disadvantage if you subscribe to it. Because if you're in Bloomington and you're on IU healthcare, it's very difficult to choose your doctor in Indy. Matter of fact, it's impossible if you don't have the money.
Right.
I don't know how to say this exactly, but you can reword it if you want. Disregard for the frequent flyers. You shouldn't have to go to the emergency room 3 times before you get tested for COVID when you had it the first time that you went, which is something I have recently experienced and I'm quite ticked off about.
And that goes back to the understaff and overcapacity issue.
But it's not only that, it's an attitude apparently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you
Absolutely.
present a problem to them by going to the emergency room, they need to look beyond that problem,
Yeah.
because maybe that's not the real problem. And
Yeah.
I have not experienced that to be true in
Yeah.
the recent month.
Yeah, I think it's a both and. It's that sense of like, if you don't have the time to spend with your patients, that's going to be a problem. But there's also ableism, and it's a particularly painful irony because the system that theoretically understands ableism the best is one that you still have to have a certain degree of ability in order to, or a great degree of.
Well, and the newest thing is a lot of times doctors are only going to see you virtually.
Yeah.
So if you're not computer literate or don't have access.
Yeah.
So we got telehealth here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have
We got technology issues over here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's something else that, in terms of access as well, not only is it the frequent flyer issue, but it is a lack of ability to interpret because we have inadequate staffing looking at psychosocial issues when individuals come in for emergent care. Oftentimes, there are language differences. There is lack of training, of staff to be able to ascertain what is the real problem going on here.
That's a great point. We have all these things listed. I don't know about you, but like this makes me feel great.
Yeah.
And then I know that
Right.
my doctor doesn't always communicate with the doctor who saw me at the walk-in clinic. Doesn't ever communicate with my therapist. Those sorts of things that my specialists, forget it.
You could end up with.
Cardiologists and kidney doctors, they never talk to each other. I don't know what's going on with that.
And we have the technology now that
Right.
You ought to be able to do that.
they should be able to do this because you can go back and look at somebody's health history. It's on a computer right in front of the doctor.
But the difficulty is we have all of this hacking that's going on. I just spoke to a former colleague of mine who's at Eskenazi Hospital. And about a month ago, they had been hacked, the Russian hacked. They still are not up at full power. So physicians can't talk to each other. Electronic prescriptions cannot be generated. All of this disabling because it's both a blessing and a curse to be on electronic medical records.
I'll
Another
also
point.
say that in Indiana, it's behind.
Oh,
Being on the East
way
Coast,
behind.
no.
Behind. Even Illinois is way ahead.
That's
That's what my husband does. He worked in that area for a long time, but Indiana is 30 years.
And more than just health issues
They're like,
Yeah.
they're like, would you like access to my health or whatever? I'm like, yeah, because that was really great at CHOP when Philadelphia. And it has nothing.
Well, technology can also encourage like more information than you need.
Overdependent.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're in the hospital, and the nurses, of course, are doing what they're supposed to do, but they come in and chart 3 or 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And they accumulate so much information on those computer charts. And I mean, you know, the paper part from like 29 days in 2015, they couldn't fit it in one binder.
No.
Now, how are you going to communicate the most important parts of all
Yes.
that charting? And
Exactly.
again, that is not the nurse's fault, because they
No.
were all amazing.
Yeah.
But the system tells them you have to chart everything, every time.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in there is
It's almost about litigation.
inefficient use of
Entirely
information or
about
something.
litigation. And that was a
Yeah.
point that I was going to make. We are a litigious society, and that has
Mhm.
generated
Yes.
much of that. And in addition to that, the insurance companies are getting so, they ratchet down on healthcare providers now to such an extent that if you see a patient for over 7.5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
you will be docked in the amount of reimbursement.
Oh, yeah.
And recently, I had a colleague share with me that now they're even docking the PTO of physicians if their productivity is not at the level it's supposed to be.
Wow. Well, and someone was just visiting here from Minnesota previous, I don't think any of you would have been here other than Kay, someone who filled in for us like an interim pastor.
Yeah,
And they were here for her to go to optometry school.
Yeah.
So they came back last weekend for their 35-year reunion. She just sold her practice to the person that she had brought in. But she talked about how sometimes, and this was based on a conversation that the two of them had, and she said she always looked who was coming in the next day, what was the diagnosis that they were coming in, what were the issues, whatever. She spent time at night preparing for the next day.
absolutely.
And she said sometimes there would be, many, many, many pages on the computer related to that person. And so you're saying our system that's been set up by insurance, which
Yeah.
seems to drive the care we get,
Yeah,
doesn't allow for that.
Yeah, so our son, who's a therapist, says that he's being hassled because he's seeing people for an hour,
They wanted to see their half hour.
45 minutes.
Oh, so the 15-minute overtime
He's not gonna get reimbursed.
is,
Yeah, it's
yeah, they're
almost,
refusing the
it's
reimbursement?
almost cutting it in half.
Oh, wow.
yes.
Well, we're at our time, and
Yeah.
we didn't get to my third question, what does the ideal look like, right? Like, and what is missing? And so let me just send you back to the statement to point out just a few things. The first one is that the statement makes clear that we do have a personal responsibility for our own health. Like, that's actually something that probably has to be said. I mean, like, theologically, we're stewards of our health, Maybe they just put that in there to get pastors, I don't know, but there it is. But then the other piece being that we have an obligation to advocate for better health care. And so it does set up some guiding principles as to what we think we should be advocating for in the meantime. And it's interesting to me, this was written in 2003, I still don't think that we've met the bare minimum advocacy suggestions that are present in this.
Might be going the other way.
In terms of affordable, accessible, those sorts of things. I mean, they're not even talking about like socialized medicine, they're just talking about affordable access for all. And I still haven't reached that.
I will make this very quick, I have to share this though. My healthcare physician is someone I have known since she was a child. She was a good friend of my daughter's. I go in for my annual physical, and you know how they go through all the, do you smoke, I mean, she knows all this. And then but she still goes through it. And then she gets to a question. She says, are you registered to vote?
What?
me being a member of League of Women Voters and very involved in that, and I said, yes. And she goes down a couple more questions, and I said, why did you ask me if I was registered to vote? And she said, because too many of my patients are not voting in their own best interest for their health.
Wow.
And she says, I will help them fill out their voter registration
Yay.
or print out a form.
Awesome.
I was absolutely blown away. I've never heard of that.
That's fantastic.
And it just was, I had to share that.
All right, so one more week on race, and then we will have Emily Pike and
That's not government.
thank you, government from United Way here. So I'm hoping that we'll have even more people, so we'll probably move that either into the sanctuary or Heritage Hall on the
Okay.
24th, so just so you know, if we're not here, we'll be there. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your
Thank
day.
you too.
They're gonna have a
Glad to meet you, Miss Moss.
What was your name again?
Jan, and the last name is Sin with 2 N's.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
another
yes.
German.
Well, I was gonna say, German means sense.
Yeah, and my maiden name was my father was Paul Johann. Yeah, so. We just returned to Germany about, I think